Thanks, everybody. Great discussion. Appreciate you coming, some of you for traveling quite far to get here. So our last session before our next break is with somebody who I only got to meet formally last night. Tracy Goodhue is the founder of More Good Solutions. One of the things we often talk about when we talk about digital identity or just identity in general is the idea of how do we actually build systems that work well for everybody. Sometimes we don't, and we forget about that. And I know Tracy's got some great perspectives from her own, personal experiences, as well as what she does in her career to try to focus on maybe some of the things we forget about sometimes. So with that, Tracy, I'll invite you up. Press the play thing, and it should advance your slides. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Again, I want to introduce myself. I'm the founder of More Good Solutions, where I'm starting a conversation around accessibility and cybersecurity. But first, I want to start with a little bit of an exercise. So if I could ask everybody to please talk to the people around you for a moment, introduce yourself, and maybe just tell them what you're going to have for dinner tonight. But what I want you to do is have your hands over your ears when you're doing it. I'll give you a minute to do this. All right, everybody, thank you for that. Okay, so I want everybody to pay attention to how that experience went. Think about what you did in that situation. You heard the room, you heard the noise, you leaned in a little bit to your neighbor around you. It was a little bit of a struggle, wasn't it? Well, according to the World Health Organization, 1 in 4 people will have a hearing disability by 2050. So that means 25% of this room might come down to disability at some point. And I'm standing here as one of those people. So from the age of 3, I had a congenital condition that caused cysts to grow around the bones and the hearing bones in my middle ear. By the age of 11, I had to have those bones removed in my left ear. By the age of 21, I had a perforated eardrum in my good ear, which is the other side. So by the end of my college career, I was basically deaf. And technology, had not yet caught up to that. So I learned to adapt. And basically what adaptation looked like was me learning where to sit in a crowded room. If you notice today, I was sitting in the very back corner with my back to the wall so that I could have access to the entire room at one time without hearing everybody behind me, because that is a common occurrence that happens in my current condition. But I have learned to always walk on the correct side of people. So that correct side differs. So sometimes when I'm out exercising with friends, we're out for a run, I will not have my hearing aid on. And that means that my good ear is this side. So I will be sure that I'm always running on this side so that I can have a conversation with them. However, when I have my hearing aid on, this is my good side. So my good side switches, and you'll see me bouncing around back and forth depending on what I'm doing that day. So that's something that I've learned to adapt to. And also, it's also knowing where sound comes from. So if you think about in that scenario where you were all talking, if I'm standing in a room like that and somebody across the room calls my name, because I have better hearing in one ear than the other, I can't necessarily tell which direction sound is coming from because you need both ears to do that. So that is all well and good. But there are some bright sides, and I will get into the pandemic in a moment. However, my husband snores like a bear. I can sleep very soundly just by taking my hearing aid off and sleeping next to him. So we're compatible in that regard. But the pandemic came. And one of the things that you don't think about when you're communicating, when you leaned into that person, when you were talking to them, you were also looking at them. You were probably reading their lips inadvertently without even realizing it. And when the pandemic happened, that was taken away. So now everybody had this half of their face covered. And it was very hard to see if people were smiling, if they were frowning, because another way that I have learned to adapt is to mirror what's going on around me. I may hear maybe 75% of what's being said, and that's today with my hearing aid, but early on without my hearing aid, I maybe heard 50 to 60%. So I just pretended that I was hearing everything that was being said. And even now, I inadvertently do this. And it's just a way of assimilating to your situation. I don't want to be an outsider. And it's bad enough that I have to ask people to repeat themselves over and over again. So sometimes it's just easier to go along and play along. So when the pandemic happened and I was not able to see people, it really caused a lot of frustration. But also think about barriers that went up during the pandemic. And these still exist in a lot of places today. I know in Florida they do. You can see that little hole down there where there's where they pass the money through or the food through. I'm constantly having to put my ear to the counter to hear what's being said at the bank. And this is just something that I've learned to overcome. And one thing that has happened though during the pandemic, technology changed my life. So not only did I get my hearing aid, which again was a technological advancement where I have a bone anchored hearing aid. It's not a traditional in the ear. So it's actually screwed into my head. And I will show anybody after this talk if they want to see it. But along with having this bone anchored hearing aid, technology was then improved on my phone. I can take phone calls directly to my hearing aid. I can hear music directly in my ear. Nobody else around me can hear it, which in a work setting works pretty well. But also think about Zoom. I was able to work from home at this point. I was able to control my world with a touch of a button. I could see everything that was being said on the screen. I didn't have to worry where somebody was in the room was talking because they were all sitting directly in front of me, and I had captions. So because of that, I was able to thrive in my professional career. But this is the third time I have spoken about my story. And a lot has changed from the very first time, because this is where I would have ended. How technology has been amazing, has changed my life for the better. But then from 2 years ago, my personal circumstances changed. And it was professionally changed, where I was working for a new company that eventually called us all back into the office. And I was a project manager at this time. I used to host meetings for a global team, and nobody was in the office with me. Although I was sitting in an office with open floor plan placed just like this, and I had to be on Zoom calls all day. But that's only one thing, is having that surrounding noise. But this company also did not have, they did not encourage people to be on camera. So I no longer had the facial expressions of the people on the meeting with me. And then they also, for their information security policy, did not allow any captioning or transcriptions of their meetings. And that was 100% of my role. So I had these three challenges: being in a noisy environment, not being able to see the people that I was talking to, and also not having the captions in front of me. And also because I was with a global team, I had to listen through accents that were very foreign to me. So this is all something this is basically, if you see the screen, this is what my world was like. It was very bland, very opaque. And it comes down to the fact that 55% of our communication comes just from being able to see the people around you. And if your culture is not allowing people to be on camera and not encouraging that, because I know we all have Zoom fatigue at some point in time, there are people that are being impacted by that. They may not even realize this. And so if only 7% of communication is through verbal words alone, that's on somebody that is normal hearing. Okay, so somebody like me, all of these statistics are skewed. Okay, so most of my communication is probably more visual than it is auditory. So I spoke about the common barriers that I have had problems with, which were digital accessibility and also communication. But there's also other people that we need to think about when we set together our policies. I mean, are we addressing people that have sensory challenges, cognitive policy, your policy and cultural barriers, preventing people from gaining access to everything they need, and then of course the physical barriers of the space that they're in. So what can you do? So I'm sure many people in this room are familiar with this, the CIA triad. And one thing I want you to really lean into is availability. Because if you are not having all of your processes, policies, allowing all this information to be available to everybody in your organization, then that is not accessible. And this is where accessibility and availability are tied hand in hand. So there's some questions that you can ask, and this is just a random set of questions that we can address here, but there's so many more that you can do. So what challenges are your employees facing every day? How user-friendly are your guidelines? Are there security requirements that are a burden to people with disabilities of any kind, sight and hearing, as well as physical and neurotypical? How can accessibility be incorporated into your cybersecurity awareness trainings if it's not already? Are current cybersecurity tools compatible with assistive technologies? Think about screen readers, because there are certain tools that need to be used with that. Are your response teams trained to support people like myself when there is a security incident? And then are employees aware of available options to accommodate their accessibility needs? There's global accessibility standards. Are you meeting those? Are employees providing ongoing feedback? Are they encouraged to? Because you want to have that open communication with your employees, or things will never change. And then how can leadership champion these accessibility changes that are needed in all cybersecurity initiatives? And then lastly, what can you do? Because in today's changing environment, where DEI programs are being downsized or being replaced, inadvertently accessibility was rolled into some of those programs. So we may need to rely on our individual selves to promote accessibility in the workplace versus a program that is corporate-wide. So that is what I would ask you to do. So thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.